Parents, if you are listening, what if I told you that your children in English class, secondary schools, both in junior and senior cycles, have the potential to be subject to reading and studying and watching graphic sex scenes, bondage, bestiality, torture, pedophilia, minors having sexual encounters with their stepmother, incest and rape? Would you be shocked, horrified? When I recently received this report, I personally was in disbelief. My name is Brian Davis. I work in the radio, but the information I read in this report, I wouldn't even be allowed to say on radio. Yet it has the very real potential to be taught in our schools nationwide. I've been asked to host this meeting on this platform to raise awareness of this unbelievable situation. And my two guests are Wendy Drynan and Jackie O'Regan. Jackie O'Regan is a parent of 4 children, a committee member of Irish Parents Review English Curriculum. There's a blog site which reviews all the novels, plays and films currently on the prescribed list issued by National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, the NCCA. Wendy Drynan, an English teacher who has authored an independent research paper which examines the content and themes of the current prescribed English texts for junior cycle and leaving certificate. This report will examine 2 different questions. One is there a bias or balance evident in the type of text chosen by the NCCA for inclusion on the prescribed lists, and are the chosen texts appropriate for use in the classroom where the majority of students are still considered minors? So first things first, Wendy, can you explain the role of the NCCA and the term prescribed lists?
Yes, and thank you for having us today, Brian. Thank you. Yes, the acronym NCCA stands for the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, and it's a statutory body, a council, that advises the Minister for Education and Skills on curriculum content, what is actually taught in the classroom in each subject, and on assessment matters as well. So the NCCA, this council is led by a Chief Executive Officer, a principal officer for the Curriculum and Assessment Policy Unit, and then there's also an education officer for each subject. So in this case, we're talking about the education officer for English, and who guides a development group as well, who presumably is actually responsible for choosing the texts which our children are to study. Prescribed text, just to explain that as well, that refers to the official lists of texts. And when we say the word text, we mean novel, play or film. And these lists are compiled and updated by the NCCA every few years. And the lists are ratified, if you like, by the Department of Education, the Minister for Education and Skills, and then they're released publicly on various educational websites, ncca.ie, Curriculum Online, education.ie. These lists are then sent out in a circular to all the schools around the country, and teachers are then obliged to choose from these lists which novels, plays and films their students will study. So if the texts are good, there isn't any problem, but if they're not, which is what parents all over the country are now saying, and then we have a problem. So just to explain a bit more, the objectionable texts in question were introduced between 2014 and 2018, and a kind of a seismic change seems to have occurred then, and the highly sexualized and darker texts began to make their appearance for the first time then. So anyway, in answer to your question, Brian, the short answer is the NCCA is a council or committee who choose what books your child will study, and the prescribed lists are the official lists which of books which your child's teacher is obliged to choose from.
All right. Jackie, over to you now. Can you explain a bit about the Irish Parents Review English Curriculum, your involvement, and what is its purpose?
Yes, Brian, thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss this. And I have been part of this Irish Parents Review English Curriculum Committee since 2020. It's comprised of parents, some of whom are teachers. And the purpose of it is to discuss the issue of the suitability of a lot of the newer, more modern books that have been added to the English curriculum in recent years. So last summer then we set up a blog called the irishparents.blogspot.com in order to inform parents about these changes and to let them read and review the actual books and movies for themselves. Up to this point, it seems that parents were totally oblivious to the materials that their child's teacher was given to teach in the classroom. So this is largely for a couple of reasons, really. Many parents don't ask their kids which books they're studying in English class. And then maybe after a while, when the kids start reading them, they're too embarrassed to tell their parents about the books. And in fairness, then many teachers are still sticking to the old, reliable, familiar texts, and they don't contain any objectionable content.
Jackie, so many people like myself up to only a few weeks ago when I heard about this are totally oblivious to what is on that there could be a problem on the English curriculum. Can you go a little bit more in depth into give us a couple of examples of what many parents seem as inappropriate?
Yes, absolutely. So to the best of my knowledge, most of the novels, plays and films on both the junior and the senior cycle have been reviewed, and they're available for viewing on the blogspot, irishparents.blogspot.com. There's been some new editions listed in January, so they will also be reviewed shortly too. They've just been added. So if I was to open up the blog right now, just to give you some examples. So the first 10 books which would pop up, to give you an idea, would be The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, 1984 by George Orwell. Some of these might be familiar even to the parents. Some of them are classic. The Lauras by Sarah Taylor, This One Summer by Mariko Tamaki, and Out of the Shadows by Jason Wallace. So just to give you an example of what might actually you can see on the blogspot, one of the books that was reviewed was called the Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. It's currently on the junior cycle prescribed list, and so it's recommended by the NCCA for second and third years. So it describes horrific scenes of bondage and torture and bestiality. And I'm just going to give you direct quotes of what's actually happening in this actual review. So this is a review that's on the blogspot, so I'm going to read it. The chapters open with a huntress captures and performs surgery on people and animals in which she chops them, fuses their bodies together to form new entities. The room in which the torture and surgery is carried out is described in graphic detail with tables stained with blood, chains and manacles upon them, and leather restraints. And the story's main character, David, is shown a girl's head after it has been removed from its body and mounted on a piece of dark wood. To quote, her hair had been washed and spread out on the block, held in place by a thin glue. Her eyes had been removed and replaced. Her skin had been coated with a waxy substance to preserve it, and her head made a hollow sound with the huntress wrapped upon it. Butchered children and decapitated bodies are randomly described, and severed heads are continually featured and used in the story. The huntress, an adult, kisses her victim, a minor, on the lips and exposes herself to him totally naked as she chains him to the table and falls asleep on a pallet beside him. Bloody, torn flesh and graphic gore and violence combined with sexual scenes make up a substantial part of this book. David, a minor, is even unwittingly lured into a sexual scenario involving his mother's stepmother. Bestiality is shown in chapter 9, where, and I quote, women go willingly to lie with wolves, end quote. In chapter 24, open quotation, a bedchamber contained a naked woman and a naked man, and the crooked man would bring children to them, and the man and woman would whisper things to them in the darkness of their chamber, telling them things that children should not know, dark tales of what adults did together in the depths of the night, end quotation. So, Brian, that's an actual review by a parent, and then we have some parents' reactions then to that. So John D, County Limerick, he's a dad, three teenage sons. His verdict: who in their right mind would want their child reading this rot? Let's fight to get this book removed from our classrooms. Another verdict from Martin and Pauline, they're in County Limerick. Their verdict, what? A couple of question marks. You can't be serious. This is unbelievable. I will never, in capital letters, allow my kids to read this book. It should be banned. Another verdict from James and Teresa in County Cork, their parents of 4 teenage sons. Their verdict was disgusting, off the wall, totally inappropriate for junior or senior cycle. Are they trying to turn our children into zombie murderers who have sex with their stepmother and chop people up for the fun of it? A load of exclamation marks after that. Where is the literature in that? Question mark. So we can see, Brian, from that, that this book contains torture, bondage, murder, not so subtle hints of bestiality, incest, paedophilia, and really the comments, Brian says that it's unequivocally a big resounding no from the parents on that one. Another one that was reviewed on the website, amongst others, is called The Lauras by Sarah Taylor. And this is, I'm reading this from the blog.
Yeah, I have a copy of the report here as well, and the blog spots here, and I was shocked looking at this. If you will, let's have a look at The Lauras. Check this out. This is even more shocking. This is The Lauras by Sarah Taylor on the senior cycle prescribed list, and I want to apologize in advance for the offensive nature of what I'm about to read. So my apologies indeed. I don't use this language at home in my house, and I certainly don't want it read in I have teenagers myself. I don't want it read in schools either. The Lauras by Sarah Taylor contains a barrage of offensive words and phrases such as crotch giblets in my pants, human being, would you let me suck your sucker and see off, etc., etc. 5 descriptive scenes of reference to masturbation, several scenes of physical violence, drug use, and scenes set in a strip clubs and drag clubs where the minor in the story lets an adult dress me like a doll. Every chapter is infused with reference to sexual acts or sexual thoughts, has no other obvious theme or redeeming merit for the classroom. On pages 56 to 60, there is a graphically described scene in which a minor is subjected to oral sex in a car by an older man and decides afterwards she rather enjoyed the experience. The scene is explicit, describes in detail the man's or his that's what it's mentioned, and what he expects the girl to do with it, what she does to it with her mouth and her tongue, and what it felt and tasted like, etc., etc. Now, do you want that read in your classroom? Do you want your teenage girls reading that? So this is a couple of the parents' reactions here. This is the verdict of Elaine T. She's a concerned mother of teenagers in County Louth. This is unbelievable to think that this book has been selected, presumably by the NCCA. And then someone else here, Lisa and David M. from County Dublin. And they're parents to a 13-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And they say, not at all suitable for teenagers in terms of influence, immoral and crude. Here's another one, an angry mum, Jane T. in County Donegal. This book was chosen with a definite agenda in mind. English class is not the place to be pushing the sexual agenda. Where is the true literary merit in this book? It's all about dysfunction. I do not want my daughter or her friends subject to this disgusting read. And one more here from Damien C., County Dublin. She's a father who is a father and an English teacher. This book potentially normalizes an adult having oral sex with a minor. Just pause right there for a second. It should be reported. And the NCCA brought to account for choosing this book. So, does that say it all?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
There's another one here, Brian. This one summer, and it's on the junior cycle by Mariko Tamaki. You know what? If you don't mind reading that, because to be honest, I actually can't say it's too distressing. as a parent, it's really quite disturbing. So if you don't mind reading that one there.
I do mind. I don't like doing this myself.
I
don't like these words coming out of my mouth, but let me just look it up here. Here we are. Yeah. In 2016, libraries in Minnesota and Florida removed This One Summer, that's the name of the book, from their shelves after parents complained of the book's explicit and graphic use of profanity and mature themes as teenage pregnancy and miscarriage, sexual reference and crudity, explicit offensive name calling, I quote, etc., and drug use. The adults in the story are bad role models who call young women, I quote, sluts, drink beer and they take drugs. The teenagers frequently use expressions like, I quote, and jerky shit, and talk of breasts and sex. They rent the Chainsaw Massacre DVD to watch, discuss, and watch other horror movies. They talk about oral sex, I quote, blowjobs, and I quote, getting laid, mock a pregnant girl about birth control, and quote, condoms, and express the view that, quote, it's stupid that pregnant girls can't take care of their stuff, and then everything is fucked up. Maybe she deserves it, end quote. And then the pregnant girl retaliates with, a quote, you think you're so cool, you're nothing but a bag with a penis, end quote. So you can imagine that the Irish, the verdict here from the blog is Irish parents, they do not recommend this graphic novel for obvious reasons for the study in the English classroom in Ireland. Many parents will be unhappy at the crude, offensive, and immature manner in which mature themes are dealt with. It's shocking, and that's not all. There's more.
And this is the kind of material the NCCA wants to teach our kids in the English classroom now.
Yeah,
so it's incredible.
It boggles the mind. These are absolutely exactly. There are shocking examples. But hey, Wendy, are they all that bad? Are all the books that bad? Is there some? You're the one who've studied the statistics in this. In relation to the appropriate sexual contact, can you give us a little bit? Are they all that bad? And how many books are leaning this way?
Okay, well, my report shows that an imbalance in the choice of texts has emerged. 52% of the senior cycle novels and 15% of the junior cycle novels, they contain a high level of what parents are calling inappropriate, explicit, graphic, gratuitous, or offensive sexual material. So we're talking about here like graphic sex scenes, rape scenes, oral sex, masturbation, sexual violence, bondage, incest, torture, bestiality, pedophilia. So parents are concerned that 20% of the senior level novels contain a copious amount of crude and offensive sexual slang, and 12% also contain a lesser amount of what parents and teachers are now calling unacceptable, crude and offensive sexual slang. At junior level then, Brian, 6 out of the 40 novels were found to have been previously banned in public libraries and schools in America and Britain due to their inappropriate, highly sexualized content, and 6 texts at senior level were also previously banned texts for the same reasons. So I have a few books I just want to mention briefly here that are on the present curriculum. The Boy Who Lost His Face by Louis Sachar, that's recommended for first year reading.
And that potentially normalizes paedophilia.
And until recently, this was a banned book in libraries and schools across the USA. Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. That's a very popular choice in the classroom because it's an easy read, but it does contain a sex scene between a minor and a young adult man who first kidnaps her and ties her up. So that book, junior choice, it is gaining popularity, as I said, but parents are not happy about that. Never Let Me Go at senior level by Kazuo Ishiguro
portrays teenage sex
and contains at least one descriptive sex scene. Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, that makes constant reference to lust and sexual longings and contains a high level of offensive language and extreme descriptions of gore and cruelty. So that's come under parental criticism for those reasons. And then you've got Ngozi Chimamanda Adichie's book Americana and Kate Atkinson's book Behind the Scenes at the Museum. They both contain descriptive sex scenes. And Emma Donoghue's book Room, of which a movie has been made and all, that contains numerous rape scenes. Then you've got Mara Jane Satrapi's Persepolis, A Story of a Childhood. That contains a lot of sex and crude language. And then we have a book, Miss Emily, by Nuala Nikonkor, and that contains scenes of a sexual nature, including a rape, and that has been criticized by parents as well. So just to summarize then, at senior level, 16% of the texts chosen by the NCCA for study in our classrooms were previously banned texts due to inappropriate content, and 24% of the texts, which is a high percentage, have elicited much parental objection. If you look at that blog site that Jackie's representing, the irishparents.blogspot.com, and 52% of the novels contain highly objectionable sexual material that we've covered. At junior level, then 15% of the texts were previously banned. 10 of these texts have already elicited very angry responses from concerned parents. Now, I want to clarify something here. We are not talking here about censorship. We are not, my report is not advocating censorship at all, and irishparents.blogspot.com are not advocating censorship. We're all dealing with and looking at, examining what is appropriate to have on a school curriculum for minors. So to clarify that point.
That's important. It is important to say that. So this would be more ideal for third level university, or if people so choose to study this, but to have this in the schools for minors. So look, but there are some good classic novels in there too, like there's George Orwell's 1984. What do you think about that book, Wendy?
Okay, well, there are classics in there. There are like a number of Shakespeare texts, and the Brontes and Jane Austen texts like that have not listed any parental criticism whatsoever. They're all reviewed there on the blog site. However, 1984, it is indeed on the prescribed list. It is indeed considered a classic, but it is very decidedly an adult book, judging by parental reaction on the blog spot. Sometimes, we make the mistake and think that just because a book is considered a classic, that it's suitable for every age group to read. But let's examine 1984 now, and you'll see why parents are unhappy for their teenagers to be reading it. So this book then, it's a dystopian story. It's set in the future because it was written in 1949, and every thought and move of the people is closely monitored by the thought police, and no one is allowed to think anything different to the government's propaganda. Jobs and free time and relationships are all closely controlled. Sounds like a bit like now, but anyway, people can be arrested at this time for stepping out of line. And in the book, unlike here, they usually disappear. They're sent to a remote labor camp or to be tortured in prison. So that's just the basic storyline. But this novel has been repeatedly banned and censored in the past due to its language and inappropriate, offensive and vulgar language and sexual content. So I'm going to give you a few examples. I've taken this now from the blog site, blog site irishparents.blogspot.com. So I'll just read it out here. Winston, the protagonist, frustrated because he cannot go to bed with Julia, an attractive young girl, imagines, quote, he would flog her to death with a rubber truncheon. He would tie her naked to a stake and shoot her full of arrows. He would ravish her and slit her throat at the moment of climax, unquote. He thinks that he might, quote, smash her head in with a cobblestone. And later, when he finally gets to kiss her and tells her, quote, I hated you, I wanted to rape you, then kill you and smash your head in, unquote, she laughed delightedly. Julia's first sexual encounter took place when she was 16 years old, and the man involved was 60 years of age. Just think about that now. Winston is happy to hear that Julia, quote, has had sex hundreds, scores of times with party members, because anything to do with corruption always filled him with a wild hope, unquote. He fantasized about the pleasure of, quote, infecting the whole lot of them with syphilis or leprosy, unquote. Quote, the more men you've had, the more I love you. I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones, unquote, says Winston. And later he officially admits he is willing to, quote, disseminate venereal diseases, to encourage prostitution, to murder and to corrupt children, unquote, in order to weaken the power of the party. Julia and Winston spend much time debating sexual issues and its relation to party politics. Fornication and prostitution are talked of and accepted. Quote, eroticism and sexual intercourse within marriage were to be despised, unquote. Marriage itself is scorned and prostitutes are viewed as subhuman. Sexual scenes between Winston and his wife, Winston and a prostitute, and Winston and the girl are described, sometimes in detail. A connection is made between violence and sex. Winston describes how he had once contemplated throwing his wife over the cliff. Winston carelessly kicks away a severed hand after a bomb attack, and descriptions of torture in the first part of the book involved cracked teeth, broken bones, bloody clumps of hair, and progress in severity in the later part to include kicking and smashing of fists in the face, fingers broken by a boot, face, groin, testicles, etc. smashed with truncheons, iron rods and boots, bones twisted out of shape, and electrocution of the body in Room 101 torture chamber. So verdict then by the Blogspot says, this is an adult book too graphic for school-going young people. The interesting backdrop to the story and the relevance of government involvement in our present lives does not justify exposing young impressionable teens to sexual and physical violence, cruelty, gore and vitriol. So that's taken from irishparents.blogspot.com.
Wow. I mean, you made an interesting point there earlier, Wendy, when you said that sometimes we make the mistake and think just because a book is considered a classic that it's suitable for every age group to read. Another example of that one would be The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. It's also considered by many to be a modern classic, but it contains rape and torture scenes. And again, look, from the Blogspot, these are listed. This parental review, Kate from County Kerry says about this book, just because a book is getting a lot of publicity or is written by a famous author does not mean that it is good, helpful or appropriate for our children to be studying in school. And this is definitely the case with The Handmaid's Tale. This is an adult book and not at all edifying or safe for our teenagers to be reading if we value their mental health at all. Renee then, she's a mother of 3 in County Cork. What she says about The Handmaid's Tale, this book is clearly written to an adult audience and should not be on any secondary school reading list. This book contains violent pornography. I would be horrified if I knew that my children had these images put into their head at such a vulnerable age. Obviously, the shock value is there to prove a point, but the graphic imagery is too extreme.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I have a few the scenes here that I shall quote here that I found particularly disturbing in this as well. Sometimes the movie, I quote here, sometimes the movie is showed, sorry, let me say that. Open quote, sometimes the movie she showed would be an old porno film from the 70s or 80s. Women kneeling, sucking guns, women tied up or chained with dog collars around their necks, women hanging from trees or upside down, naked with their legs held apart, women being raped, beaten up, killed. Once we had to watch a woman being slowly cut into pieces, her fingers and breasts snipped off with the garden shears, her stomach slit open and her intestines pulled out. That's from the book. Here's another quote. Sex with the commander while she lays on the lap of the commander's wife. Quote, my red skirt is hitched up to my waist, though no higher. Below it, commander is what he is the lower part of my body, end quote. Babies born with disabilities known as, quote, unbabies and are killed. So this is another aspect of it as well. I'm reading this is from the Blogspot as well, Irish parents.blogspot.com. It says, quote, what will Arf Warren give birth to? A baby, as we all hope, or something else, an unbaby with a pinhead or snout like a dog's, or 2 bodies, or a hole in his heart, or no arms, or webbed hands and feet. There's no telling, end quote. And then here we have another one, offered hopes that a few of the guards will, quote, get hard, end quote, while looking at her and having to rub themselves on the barricade. Then here's another one. During an examination, the doctor puts his hands between Offred's legs and offers to help her get pregnant himself. And then phrases like getting laid, on all fours, spread your legs, and much, much more. After reading this, this is from the blog spot here. After reading this novel, I am deeply concerned at the thought of teens reading a book so full of violence and extremely disturbing sexual content. Furthermore, the entire setting of Gilead is painted in biblical terms, which leads to a subtle and often not so subtle attack on those of Christian faith. Don't we have to be more conscious, of course, of students in today's classroom coming from all types of religious backgrounds who might find this material very offensive? If the hope is to stimulate discussion about feminism, totalitarian regimes, religious oppression, and corruption, there are plenty of age-appropriate books that will accomplish this. And that was reviewed there by Rennie, mother of three, in Cork. So there you have it.
Yeah, and there's another one here from Kate from Kerry about the same book. This is a dystopian feminist tirade exploring and graphically describing sexual themes. Various scenes, including rape, described as F-word, while the wife of the commander rapist participates vicariously in the rape. Sex and violence are constantly linked, and the handmaiden, in brackets sex slave, is the story often fantasizes in her head about murder and suicide. At the end of the book, a mob of women are engaged to viciously attack and kill a man, and scenes inside a club where the protagonist is dressed up as a prostitute and talks with another prostitute while she considers the possibility of signing up herself. The book portrays men as useless except for sex, creating babies, and the mother-daughter relationship is again portrayed as very negative. And Kate finishes that review by saying, I certainly do not want my daughter exposed to this kind of filth. And in brackets, she says, and I don't see how this can possibly contribute to the mental health of the boys in our society either.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, one of the reviewers, it's interesting here, one of the reviewers, Renee from Cork, I think she was there, she's mentioning that some of the sexualized material could be really offensive to students from religious background, saying that the book was based in Gilead and had supposed to be, and it could be offensive, basically offensive to like in Ireland we have students coming from Ireland's like it's a melting pot of different nationalities at this stage, and we have students in classrooms who are African Christians we have, and Polish Catholics, and Muslims from all different countries as well, and we have to think of them like, their families would be absolutely horrified. And I know a lot of Irish families are absolutely horrified, but I think it's a good point to bring up, like, what about that? Are we thinking of these children at all, or did they have that in mind at all? The NCCA of people students who have families come from a religious faith.
Yeah, that's such an important point to raise, Brian. As a teacher over the years, I've had to be very sensitive to where my students are coming from in terms of their families' religious, cultural, and moral values. So nowadays we're all very sensitive to students coming from Irish African families and students who are gay. And to this end, we deal sensitively with issues of racism and sexuality, for example. And that's why books like this that we've been discussing are very offensive. There's another book, Jason Wallace's book, Out of Shadows, and I think such a strange choice to be using in today's classroom because it perpetuates the idea that Black Africans are not to be trusted and are savage, and also contains many negative slurs against boys with homosexual tendencies. One parental review of this book notes that it is, quote, littered with highly offensive sexualized language, words and phrases such as, quote, wanker, prior of the wire, pooler, bum, chum, taking it up the black bitch, poof, queer, etc., etc. Just gets worse. These words, I think, they're offensive to any student who comes from home where this type of language wouldn't be permitted, but it's obviously especially offensive to students who might be homosexual or have parents who are originally from Africa. do that.
Absolutely. In your report, then, your comprehensive report, you give a statistical analysis of the presence of offensive language, excluding sexual slangs and slurs and profanity, blasphemy in the prescribed texts. 28% of the senior novels, 15% of the senior drama texts, and 63% of the senior cycle films contain copious amount of blasphemy, profanity, and offensive language, excluding sexual slang. At junior level, 20%, 25% of the novels, 33% of the films, and 12% of the drama texts contain what parents describe as an excessive use of objectionable blasphemy, profanity, and offensive language. Another 24% of the films prescribed at junior level contain a lesser amount of what parents still consider to be unacceptable and offensive language. Parental reaction may be viewed on irishparents.blogspot.com. Again, if you want to look at that, that's irishparents.blogspot.com. By the way, presumably we are talking about Jesus Christ, the F word, the C word, the B word, etc., etc. Would some of the students, do you think, really get upset about using that kind of vocabulary nowadays? You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Many students are very uncomfortable with this kind of language being used in the classroom in a supposedly literary class by their teacher. You know, not all students come from homes where bad language is the order of the day, and students from non-Irish homes are perhaps much less likely to hear any of this language in their homes or their churches or mosques, and it can be quite shocking and highly offensive to them. I seem to recall one of the parental reviews that I read on that blog site was from an African parent, Ola, I think, and she highlighted what she called foul and offensive language in the books that she had reviewed. And she said that in her country, Nigeria, they would have more respect and it just simply wouldn't be allowed. So it's also hard for teachers, Brian. I myself, I don't use language like this in everyday life. So why would I feel comfortable using it in the classroom? I've talked with other teachers who don't read out the offensive parts. And some parents feel that it is what they're calling a form of emotional child abuse to even have these texts being brought into and taught in the classroom at all. It's unfair to subject vulnerable teenagers to this, forcing them to sit in a classroom to listen to some of this offensive, sexualized and distressing material.
Why, it begs to question, why aren't parents speaking out against this more? Like, is this maybe their first time hearing it too, or?
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, we just have to ask, and I certainly asked, what kind of a message are we giving our children through these novels? It's that it's okay to be subjected to oral sex by an adult in a car, to have sex with your classmates, to accept that it's somehow normal to be tied up before you have sex, to be as promiscuous and have as many sexual partners as possible. And of course, on top of that, then what message are young teenage boys getting when they read about sexual encounters with stepmom, or the kidnapping, continuous raping of a young woman over a 5-year period? That's in that book Room by Emma Donoghue. I mean, all of these examples are there, present in the books that the NCCA is doling out to our children in the classroom every day, and it's shocking, really.
Well, it begs to question is, why aren't teachers speaking out against this more? Wendy, have you any thoughts on that?
Well,
teacher.
Teachers are really, really busy people, for starters. The school day in your average secondary school is just rush, rush, rush. And they don't have a lot of spare time for reviewing a ton of new material. I've spoken to teachers who are teaching English in secondary schools who themselves are not completely familiar with many of the newer texts on the prescribed list. So they tend to stick to the texts that they know already, or they choose one of the less offensive newer texts. And, they might be talking about some of the offensive material they've come across while hunting for a new text. And that's why irishparents.blogspot.com is such a great resource for teachers now to have at their fingertips. It can save a lot of time. The other reason is that some teachers are afraid to speak out in case they're ridiculed or seen to be maybe a troublemaker in any way, or labeled old-fashioned or prudish. Many teachers and parents themselves are not at all happy to be forced to choose texts from this prescribed list, which is so full of offensive material and contains much less literary value than the books going back a few years, in many opinions.
Yeah. Well, why do you think the NCCA, changed tack? I know that this is only recently, this has come about. I think it was in your report, like 2018 or so. Changed tack so radically. Why did you think this happened so quickly and so radically in the past few years? Which, so many parents and teachers are objecting to this.
Well, just as a preface to that, I just want to make a point. It's interesting to note that 7 out of the 38 senior level texts are authored by self-confessed overt feminist writers. And 6 of these texts, 6 of the 7 feminist texts, push a very strongly anti-men and anti-marriage agenda and contain a high level of inappropriate, highly sexualized scenes, like the graphic sex, the oral sex, the masturbation, the rape, the torture that we spoke of. But 10 out of the 38 texts at senior level are just by female authors who do not identify themselves as feminists. And only one of those texts, Miss Emily by Nuala O'Connor, has come under criticism by parents for a rape scene in relation to inappropriate sexual content. The authors at senior level that parents are expressing most anger and concern over are, I'm going to list them out here because I think it's important. Margaret Atwood for The Handmaid's Tale, Sarah Taylor for The Lauras, Ngozi Chimamanda Adichie for Americana, Emma Donoghue for Room, Marjane Satrapi for Persepolis, Kate Atkinson for Behind the Scenes at the Museum, and Mariko Tamiki, This One Summer, because they are all well-known feminist authors and they're popular choices on 3rd level English literature courses, which we would expect. But I think that it's really a question of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, Brian, because the NCCA is so committed to updating the curriculum, but in its eagerness to find stories which feature strong female protagonists, which is a positive aim, they've chosen badly and inappropriately for the age group that we're dealing with here, namely mostly minors under the age of 18. This age group, parents feel don't need to be any more sexualized than they already are from TV, social media, games, RSE classes, all sex and sexuality. It's thrown in their face every day. And 53% of the senior novels are highly sexualized. And this is clearly a disproportionate representation of the one theme of sex and sexuality. There are so many other themes which could and should be explored at this age in literature class. It might be asked what good parent really wants their teenager obsessing about and experimenting with sex while they're still under the age of 18. So,
yeah. There's another thing you mentioned here in your report in relation to male-female roles at senior level. It says there 12 out of the 25 prescribed novels positively feature a strong female protagonist, while only 2 novels portray a positive male role model or a positive example of male heroism / bravery. There are no examples of positive male role models, heroism, bravery present in the senior drama text. That is no examples of that in the senior drama text. At junior level, 1 drama text and 4 of the novels out of the 40 portray a positive role model. 6 of the 40 novels emphasize male heroism, bravery, while 12 of the 40 novels present a strong female protagonist. There is obviously a bias here. That is what you have written in your report. So, what other topics do you think parents and teachers would like to be exploring with their students? Is there what would be more ideal, Wendy?
Well,
parents saying.
There are lots of great topics like self-sacrifice for the greater good, maybe the virtue of platonic friendship, loyalty, more positive, or some at least positive portrayals of marriage, family life, positive portrayals of parent-child relationships, things like determination to succeed against the odds, bravery in the face of fear. Jackie, would you have more?
Yeah, I mean, again, just from talking about this with parents and seeing the reviews and that, I think there'd be a suggestion for, issues on forgiveness, discuss environmental issues or animal rights, coping with grief in a normal death, divorce, separation within the family, coping with chronic terminal illness within the family. And these are all things that would potentially affect a lot of people. Coping with a family member being in prison, coping with mental illness or disability, immigrant issues, I mean, this is all trying to, low-level racism in a relevant setting like a school. If there was a story around that, they could relate to that. They're in their loneliness. This would all be in around so many things, even within the immigrant issues that we could discuss: difficulty obtaining resident status, poverty, loneliness. That's all within even that one subject there. Another thing, bullying, sports, nature, wildlife, and even some parents were kind of commenting about biographies of truly inspirational people, that have affected our history. Historical novels, again, a good way of learning history when it's couched in novel format. And then another example would be exploration of cultures other than Western. So, they're all things that would affect teenagers on a daily basis, rather than going off down into the kind of dark themes that we've been considering in the other books.
Mm.
Yes, my report talks about this and contains some of these suggestions and others. They came mainly from parents during the online survey that I conducted as well. Yeah.
Let's just talk about just the other themes that are represented in the novels at both senior and junior level. So what are the other themes that are going on?
Yeah, there's also a heavy emphasis on dark topics like loss, family dysfunction, and death. But outside of those topics, which make up a large portion of the curriculum, I will give you a statistical breakdown of some other themes dealt with. So if you can see there on your screen now, some stats should be coming up. So out of the 26 senior novels which have been reviewed thus far, there are a few more that need to be reviewed now since January. A few more have been added. But out of the 26 reviewed so far, we have 2 novels dealing with the theme of war. We've got 16 novels dealing with the theme of loss. 48% of the novels deal with general family relationships, which seems good, but 24% of these are set within a dysfunctional family. Then we've got 7 novels that have some romance, which is good, as opposed to 52% of the books containing objectionable sexual scenes. We don't have any dealing with pro-choice, pro-life issues. We have 2 novels that treat a little bit of the euthanasia, assisted suicide subject. One is about that, actually. 2 novels contain examples of poverty, but we don't have any book, dealing with or really examining that issue. We only have 1 novel showing an example of self-sacrifice for the higher good of others. We have 4 novels dealing with cultures other than Western. And 5 novels which deal very briefly with platonic friendships. 2 novels dealing with the theme of forgiveness and nothing about animal rights. 4 novels dealing with racism. Now, this is an important stat here. We've got 48% of senior books dealing with murder, suicide, tragedy, or an unnatural death. That's 12 of the novels. That's amazing, almost half of the novels. And yet we don't have a single book that deals with grief after a normal family death. Which is an interesting stat. And then we've 1 novel dealing with coping with a terminal illness. Okay, junior cycle then, there's a bit more balance. If you look at the figures there, we've 13% set in war, 45% are dealing with loss, but 10 of those texts are dealing with it quite heavily. So we have 3 novels dealing with romantic love. We've got 15% of the junior cycle novels which do have inappropriate sexual content. Then we've got 17 of the novels that are dealing with platonic friendship, that's healthy, that's good. 23% of those novels emphasize it strongly, that's good. We've got 10 texts at junior level dealing with self-sacrifice for the good of others, and 3 novels touching briefly on forgiveness. Now, we don't have any text dealing with euthanasia, assisted suicide, or pro-choice, pro-life, or the environment, which was surprising at junior level. But one good thing, we've got 25% of the novels, 10 novels, are dealing with the topic of racism. So plenty of choice there for the teachers. A bit more balanced at junior level.
Yeah, we do see a bit more balance here until we turn and look at what many concerned parents are describing as the dark themes running through a high percentage of the drama texts and also the films and novels of the curriculum at the junior level. So Wendy's report shows that whereas there is a disproportionate representation of sex and sexuality in the Leaving Cert curriculum, there is an undue emphasis on death, murder, suicide, and tragedy on the junior curriculum. Do you think parents? Do you not think it would be a good thing for parents to have their kids deal with these topics, to bring them up, to discuss them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Brian, but what parents are concerned about is the gratuitous violence and the undue emphasis on the unnatural types of death like murder, suicide, violent ends, to the exclusion, as we've seen in the stats, of dealing with regular grieving process. Or a regular family death. So it's the imbalance really. And I suppose those things in an ordinary family setting. And I think they're already bombarded with so much of this that at this pivotal stage in their lives, do they really need to be thinking about suicide and murder in that unbalanced, overemphasized sense? I think that's where parents have their concerns.
Yeah. Junior level, 29% of the prescribed drama texts deal with or contain suicide, while 53% of the drama texts deal heavily with death, and 12% of them contain enough gratuitous violence for parents to voice complaints.
Yeah. Jackie, would you just take us through a couple of the texts that deal with this, that parents are concerned about, highlighting the dark themes?
Yeah, okay, so let's look at one of the ones on the junior cycle. It's called Stone Cold by Robert Swindle. So this is a novel, and it's about a 17-year-old boy who comes from a broken home, drunk dad, promiscuous mum's boyfriend in the house, etc. So he runs away to London and ends up homeless on the streets and has some unpleasant experiences and meets some unsavory characters, sexual predators. He comes across an old army sergeant who has been kicked out of the army and spends his days roaming the streets, luring young, vulnerable, homeless boys back to his flat where he murders them and hides them under the floorboards. In the book, the serial killer outlines potential methods of disposing his victims, such as acid baths, dismemberment, and filling a victim's shoes with cement before dumping the body in the river. This book contains a good deal of profane, offensive language. He has at least 7 bodies there by the time he lures our young protagonist home, ties him up, is about to kill him, etc., before the police move in. So the story ends on a bleak note with the young lad still friendless and homeless. There is no redeeming quality in the story, no glimpse of hope for the boy's future. The book also contains offensive expressions and language. So quite a lot of dark theme going on there. Another one, again, from the irishparents.blogspot.com, is one called The Bog Child by Siobhan Dowd. And the parent goes on to say, The Bog Child by Siobhan Dowd is a very dark, with a hunger striker, a body buried in the bog, nightmares and flashbacks, lots of coarse language. The book The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton is another one, tells the story of 2 gangs of young people who are constantly after each other, talks of violence, muggings, gang beatings, gang fights, revenge, murder, and depicts young teenagers carrying blades, putting them at people's throats to steal from them. Throughout the book, there are scenes depicting underage drinking, smoking, and shoplifting. The teenagers talk about their dislike of having to obey the law and have one rule of their own: don't get caught. In one instance, 2 kids, 14 and 16 years of age, run from the law after one of them murders one of the gang rivals. So another review about this particular book, The Outsiders, is not, and this is Jim in Orlan, County Limerick. The Outsiders is not particularly well written and does not give any balance to the negatives it portrays. There are no good role models and few redemptive moments in this story. Rather, it is full of disturbing murders, suicide, fighting, family conflict and dysfunction, objectionable language and violence. And the verdict of this review is, while we understand that social realism has its place in literature, we feel that many young students at junior level could benefit from studying a more positive book, as life at this age can be depressing enough. As a collective group of parents and teachers, we do not recommend this book for the classroom. As parents, we feel this is not a suitable book for young, impressionable teenagers and are unhappy that our girls have had to read it. And there's another one there, Brian, just to keep just on dark themes. Lover by Brian Friel, drama text. This is a drama text at junior level, deals with the usual old Irish stereotypes and has the young lovers going off at the end, presumably to commit suicide or drown tragically in the lake because of their pregnancy. Again, not a very pleasant theme there. Another one, The Woman in Black. This is another review from the blog site. This is a 1983 horror novel by Susan Hill, written in the style of a traditional Gothic novel. The plot contains a mysterious spectre that haunts a small English town. A lawyer is assigned to travel to the village to examine a house that belonged to a recently deceased woman. He discovers the spirit of the same woman and learns that she's killing the village children, causing them to commit suicide. There are disturbing parts, people lighting themselves on fire, someone coughs up lots of blood, and a lot of psychological threat. 3 young girls also jumped out a window and the woman is shown hanging from the roof. So the verdict from this review, we as Irish parents do not feel that young people aged 15 and under will benefit from studying disturbing material like this. We cannot recommend this for study in the classroom. Stones in His Pocket. It's a play by Marie Jones, has a subplot about a young boy who, after some public humiliation, commits suicide by filling his pockets with stones and drowning himself. There's some examples there, Brian, of some of the themes of the junior cycle ones.
So it seems like the problem is the emphasis on the dark side of life, murder, suicide, with no real life dealing with the issue of death, bereavement, in any normal, healthy way. It's just bleak with no hope in it.
Yeah, and as a parent, I mean, I would love to see more texts, for example, like Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson. That deals with death in a normal, healthy way, in a functional kind of a family type setting. And at the moment, there just aren't any texts on the curriculum doing this. It's just sad to say that, you know, it's a life issue. It's real life issues. But if it was dealt with in a way that would benefit teenagers rather than damage them, that's what, as parents, we would like to see, any texts that equip young people to deal with depression or hopelessness rather than bombard them with all of this darkness.
You know, what about there's films on the curriculum as well? Wendy, what are parents saying about them? Are there any complaints about the movies?
Unfortunately, lots, and with some good reason. As a teacher last year, I had to choose which movie to show my junior certs, and it was such a disappointing selection because of all the objectionable content in the majority of the movies on the prescribed list. And in the end, there were really only 2 which I felt I could choose from for the juniors, Whale Rider and Hunt for the Wilder People. They were fine. But I felt a bit annoyed because they're okay, those movies, but there are so many much better, truly excellent films out there that could have been put on the list. But I felt I might as well have been handed a list with just 2 films on it, because the others were unsuitable and would have elicited parental complaints, you know, because 40% of the junior level prescribed films contain inappropriate sexual scenes or nudity, and 3 of the films contain a high use of crude sexual language. So junior level parents are voicing most concern over Moonrise Kingdom, Sing Street, and Beasts of the Southern Wild because of sexual scenes and offensive language. And then Amadeus and Man on Wire for sex scenes and nudity. Man on Wire is a documentary, a very interesting documentary actually, about a tightrope walker. And I actually enjoyed it very much, very interesting. But at the very end, I think it was in the last 3 to 5 minutes, they had a full-on sex scene where he and his girlfriend were completely naked. And, you know, it's just inappropriate. You couldn't show that to a class of juniors. At senior level, then, parents and teachers are raising concern that 3 out of the 8 films listed on the prescribed list are rated R or teens due to inappropriate scenes. So those are Pride, Winter's Bone, and Unforgiven. And 6 of these films show sexual scenes and or nudity to contain very offensive and crude sexual language. So.
Yeah, so there's a review on the blog site as well about the movies we all reviewed. And here's one on Winter's Bone, which is, as Wendy just said, it's on this prescribed list for movies for leaving cert. Winter's Bone presents everything against a bleak, menacing backdrop. The 17-year-old female protagonist, Ree, visits various people in turn who are either drug addicts offering drugs to said minor or snorting cocaine in front of her. There are gory scenes of animal skinning and violence perpetrated on Ree by men and women. In one scene, young Ree has a glass thrown at her face and is dragged by her hair and slapped by other women. There are scenes of vandalism where a window screen is smashed with an axe. In another scene, Ree and two accomplices use a chainsaw to hack off a dead man's hands, which are Ree's father's hands. So the verdict from this particular review is Elaine in County Louth. She says, horrible, disgusting movie. This is not good art. This needs, and this is all in capital, needs to be removed from the curriculum. This is what happened in my home when my family and I sat down to watch it. After 15 minutes, my 19-year-old son left the room mumbling, "What is this? That's disturbing." He exited the room, and finally my husband turned to me and said, "I don't ever want material like this again." We didn't even watch the chainsaw scene, thank goodness. And that was from Elaine. So pretty stark there, the reaction to that movie, both by her kids, most importantly, but also her husband. So
Yeah, and just looking at the blog spot here again as well, another film on the curriculum which seems to be arousing parental anger is Hunger, directed by Steve McQueen. So the irishparents.blogspot.com says, in telling the story of Irish Republican Army member Bobby Sands, who died in Northern Ireland prison after a 66-day hunger strike in 1981, McQueen approaches his subject with vividly stomach-churning detail. Feces smeared on concrete cell walls, piles of half-eaten swill rotting in the corner, inmates dragged naked down the halls and beaten to a pulp. It's all there and more, if you can stand it, since McQueen is practically pornographic in lingering on these shots of violence and squalor. Hunger contains graphic violence, nudity, and shocking imagery. The verdict of Irish Parents Review English Curriculum is this: apart from obviously upsetting and inappropriate scenes contained in the film, Hunger also encourages and perpetrates anti-English feeling in a new generation, which is trying hard to fight racism, not practice it.
yeah, I don't know how the NCCA would consider these choices that we've been discussing as helpful or appropriate to our young people's mental health, which is obviously a topic of much discussion, especially even in the time we're in. Their mental health is so important, and subjecting them to this as a parent, you just wouldn't be going there.
Wendy, I noticed in your report you have statistics that show while, for example, in the senior level novels, 48% deal with murder, suicide, and tragedy, and 12% with demonic, all very hopeless, that 40% of the novels are overtly pushing an anti-God, religion, church, faith theme. Surely for some students, it might be their very faith which helps them lift them out of depression, suicidal thoughts, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's very true. I've known many teenage students, whose strong faith is exactly the very thing that helps to pull them through a dark time in their life.
So perhaps then, do we need to see more texts promoting faith, since we have so many people in Ireland who express their faith very differently to the old, dull, traditional way we always see portrayed in Irish movies and books? I'm sure there are more positive movies and books that we could be looking at. Speaking of mental health, we all recognize the importance of family to the well-being of young people. How does family fare in your analytical report, Wendy, in these?
Well, for me, actually, it was sad to discover that although, for example, at senior level, 48% of the novels deal with family relationships, 24% were set within dysfunctional families. So imagine the effect that has on a young person, reading scenes of anger and abuse, cursing, insults, physical abuse, etc. When the stories don't incorporate any hope or good role models to counteract the bad, it doesn't really achieve anything worthwhile that will enhance a young person's well-being. Like there has to be a redeeming quality to the story, not necessarily a happy, perfect ending, but a redeeming quality nonetheless. 69% of the senior drama texts were set within or featured dysfunctional families. And at junior level, 24% of the drama texts and 30% of the novels deal with dysfunctional family scenarios. Interestingly, I've seen students over the years coming from dysfunctional families who crave an insight into a happy, functional family scenario. And these are the very students who most enjoy the books which feature parents who love each other and siblings who get along very well, and books where the bonds between parent and child are very strong. Social realism is what the academics try to push onto these vulnerable kids, but given the choice, they often prefer to read texts featuring well-adjusted families. So that's interesting.
That is interesting, yeah. Probably more beneficial for them, I guess. But these are debatable and yeah, definitely worth to think about. Your report also shows that not a single senior text portrays any positive father-son / mother-daughter relationships, but 26% of the text paint very negative pictures of parent-child relationships.
Yep, and at junior level, it's much the same story with no texts portraying a positive relationship between a mother and her daughter or a father and his son. That's not a good thing, because we learn from example how to be in the world, and for some kids the English classroom is the place where they learn some important life lessons. The newer texts on the curriculum which we've been discussing are not, in my opinion, as a parent and a teacher, they're not having a good influence on the students anymore. There was a sad comment left at the end of a review on the blog spot. Donal Ryan's book, The Spinning Heart, is on the senior level curriculum, and it deals with the aftermath of the financial collapse in Ireland and the subsequent damage on people's lives. And this is what one parent said, it's an auntie here. I'll just read out what she said. She said, "My nephew is studying The Spinning Heart at school and hates it. He says that all the books he studies for English are bleak, depressing and rude. He used to want to be a writer, but thanks to the horrible text he is forced to study, he doesn't want to anymore. How sad is that?" So that came from County Clare. Yeah, that's the Spinning Heart review.
Yeah.
So it's hard to blame him for feeling like that, I think we've got some excerpts from The Spinning Heart we might look at.
Jackie? I have a few here, again from the blog. So this is an extract from the opening chapter from The Spinning Heart. Quotation: "I thought about killing my father all day yesterday. There are ways, to kill a man, especially an old, frail man, which wouldn't look like murder. It wouldn't be murder anyway, just putting the skids under nature. It's only badness that sustains him. I could hold a cushion or a pillow over his mouth and nose. He'd flail about, but I'd bat his hands softly back down. I wouldn't mark him. His strength is gone from him. I wouldn't like to see his eyes while I killed him." So that's like the opening chapter. Yeah. And there's another one. Yeah, it's mad. And then this one is from an extract from Lily's story. Quotation, open quotations: "Bernie charged in here like a bull. I remember smiling at him like a fool. I actually thought he'd come for a look at his child. He said nothing, only punched me straight into my face. Then he drew his big fist and punched me again right into my mouth. 'You stupid,' she said, 'you stupid, I should kill you.' My lips split open and pumped blood. My front tooth came out." Again, all very, very graphic violence there. Another one extract from Brian's story. "You know the way you get used to getting the ride, ? And then you're cut off like all of a sudden. That's what all them do, feeling do be feeling when they're going around crying over women. They're only missing the ride, close quotation. So.
Well, okay. Yeah. Sorry, everyone listening to this. It's quite a heavy thing to go through.
It is, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for your paying attention and listening here to all this. But there's more we have to get through here. So let's turn to look at the results of the parental survey that you conducted, Wendy, between the 22nd of February and March the 4th. Your online survey, you had 100 participants, and every province and type of school is represented.
Yes, that was so as to avoid bias as much as possible. I needed to get results from parents who are coming from all sorts of cultural, religious, secular backgrounds and counties, not just traditional, more conservative counties or homes, So the survey asked questions about parental knowledge of and satisfaction with the texts, which are on the current curriculum at both junior and senior level.
Can you summarize your findings for us, please, in the survey?
Yeah, there were only 8 questions, so I can actually, I can put the survey up on the screen here, the results. So the first question was, would you be happy for your child to study a book containing explicit graphic scenes of a sexual nature in English class? And 98% of the parents said no. 2, are you aware that graphic sex scenes, rape scenes, oral sex scenes, masturbation, sexual violence, bondage, incest, torture, bestiality, and pedophilia are all represented in the present texts selected by the NCCA? Now, 85% of parents said no, and interestingly enough, 15% of parents said they were, that they had come across it recently. Question 3, if you were aware that your child's teacher was choosing to teach these texts, would you complain to the school? 95% said yes, they would, and 5% said no. Question 4, are you happy for your child to be studying dark texts chosen which emphasize themes of death, murder, or suicide? And this was clarified. These are not texts dealing with how to cope with bereavement. So 95% of parents said no, they were not happy with that, and 5% said yes. Question 5, after reviewing the selection of books and films on the prescribed list, do you feel that the mental health of your teenager would be enhanced or endangered after exposure to any of these texts? And this is very interesting. 99% of parents said endangered.
Wow.
And after reviewing the selection of texts, after looking them up and reading about them, 99% of parents felt that their kids were going to be endangered by being exposed to some of these books. Question 6, what other contemporary themes, contemporary or enduring themes would you like to see emphasized in the text chosen by the NCCA? So the main themes which came up were things like friendship, loyalty, respect for others, resilience, overcoming challenges, transformation from despair to hope, courage, coping with mental struggles, the importance and value of family, character building, positive role models to exemplify what we'd like our teens to imitate, hope, more literary classics, adventure, faithfulness, justice, fighting for what is right, heroic service of others, good moral courage, bravery, compassion, positivity, success through trials, coping skills. So I thought it was very interesting to see how at odds with each other the wishes of parents and the choices of the NCCA actually are. There are tons of great books out there that have all these core values and themes. Parents instinctively know what is good for the mental well-being of their young people.
Mm-hmm. Do you think are parents expressing the wish to get more involved with choosing what goes on the English curriculum, their child's?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the survey clearly shows that in answer to the question, who do you feel should be choosing the English texts for your child to study? The overwhelming result was that 72% of the parents surveyed are asking now for a new consultation committee to be established, comprising a mixture of teachers, practicing and non-practicing, who are also parents themselves. That was noted by a lot, and parents to come on the committee as well. Now, 35% felt that these parents should hold third level degrees, but 39% thought that wasn't necessary. So 20% of the sample surveyed felt that only NCCA committee members who were parents themselves should be involved in that. Now, I'm not saying that's my opinion necessarily, but I'm just quoting what the survey gave back. And this is interesting. 100% of the parents surveyed expressed the opinion that going into the future, any NCCA member who's not a parent themselves should not be choosing text for the English curriculum. And that's quite wow. But these are the opinions of parents. One parent wrote on in response to the above question, they said, I think that this consultation committee would be the most balanced contribution, although now I have huge concerns about the judgment of the current NCCA committee members. So I recommend actually, Brian, in my report that school principals get involved at this stage and help set up perhaps, small parent English teacher committees in schools all over the country, and parents and teachers could discuss possible texts together and then pass these suggestions on to the NCCA. The current method whereby parents and teachers can suggest texts via the very convoluted route in the NCCA's website, it's just too invisible to the public. And also, I suppose it's open to abuse by activists who are making suggestions to push these agendas that we've been discussing. So it would be safer perhaps if the principals got involved and oversaw that.
Yeah, and the way to do that would, you've stated that, how to do that as well, but also to just check out the irishparents.blogspot.com as well. So Wendy, in your report contains a quote from the new curriculum guidelines for senior cycle, which states that developing students' interests in literature remains central to leaving cert English, end quote, and that they become confident, thoughtful, and discriminating adults and citizens, end quote. So clearly the present prescribed list of novels, plays, and films, as outlined by the NCCA, cannot in good conscience claim to achieve these aims at all, but rather the opposite. And you end your report with the paragraph, I'm just going to read it out here. It says, the adolescents of this country deserve the challenge of quality modern literature, which is crafted well, with resonance and beauty, featuring themes which will inspire them to be better people. They deserve to be elevated and encouraged rather than debased and put down. They need to imbibe hope rather than darkness in the classroom. No one desires that the next generation coming up will leave school with no experience of the beauty, depth, and challenge of true literature. The curriculum our teachers are presently drawing from has the harmful potential of exposing our students to the knowledge of how to torture and kill a young child, plan a suicide attempt, have sex with their mother, desecrate a corpse, and perform oral sex. They don't deserve this demeaning form of emotional abuse. That's what it is, emotional abuse. And it cannot be allowed in our classrooms. It is interesting to note that the NCCA's child safeguarding statement claims to be, quote, fully committed to safeguarding the well-being of children and young people with whom the council works, end quote, and, quote, committed to the right of every child and young person, that's every child and young person, to be kept safe and protected from harm, end quote. This report has clearly shown that our present English curriculum content is not in line with this claim. Our children and youth deserve to be introduced to quality classics, old and modern, whose timeless themes of love, family, friendship, self-sacrifice for the greater good, moral dilemmas, etc., are always universal and important in a young person's vision. For the sake of our nation's well-being, safety, and educational progress, we need to remove the offending books from our national curriculum and restore true literature to our nation's classrooms. So, very well written there, Wendy, I have to say. You also have a number of questions which need to be asked as well. Where is all this leading, and where is it going to stop?
Yes, well, I believe unless action is taken now in 2021, we're looking at the situation getting a whole lot worse, as the quality of much recently published fiction and even young adult fiction is becoming increasingly lesser and much more sexualized. The sexual agenda is out there and in our faces every day now. We don't want to be looking at, 50 Shades of Grey being put on the curriculum in 2023 when the lists are due to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, can you address this next question, please? How is any of this material beneficial to children of school-going age, the future generation of this country? How is this going to benefit them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd have to agree with Wendy, what she was just saying there in her last paragraph. And I think that parents need to speak out now to safeguard their children's curriculum rather than handing it over to a committee who are clearly very comfortable with teaching our kids about oral sex and torture and sexual bondage in the classroom. So none of this is helpful to our teenagers to be filling their heads with this kind of stuff. And as parents, we just need, first of all, to be aware and then to speak out should we disagree with that. But I think the biggest issue is that we're, for the most part, not aware that it's even there in the first place.
Yeah, it's like, how is this going to contribute to the mental well-being of our nation's teenagers? It seems bleak. You have included in your report as well research from Child Abuse Review, volume 18, issue 6, published on the 2nd of the 11th, 2009. Author of the article, John Wiley et al. The harms of pornography exposure among children and young people. Exposure to pornography is routine among children and young people, with a range of notable and often troubling effects. Exposure to pornography may be disturbing or upsetting. Exposure to pornography helps to sustain young people's adherence to sexist and unhealthy notions of sex and relationships, and especially among boys and young men who are frequent consumers of pornography, including of more violent materials. Consumption intensifies attitudes supportive of sexual coercion and increases their likelihood of perpetrating assault. While children and young people are sexual beings and deserve age-appropriate materials on sex and sexuality, pornography is a poor and indeed dangerous sex educator. The Richmond Graduate University affiliate researchers Jennifer Reimersma and Michael Sistma, Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity is the title of their publication. This is published in the 1st of the 10th, 2013. Quote, of particular concern is early exposure to graphic sexual material that disrupts normal neurochemical sexual and social development in youth. Teens are at a great risk of developing pornography addiction as their brains are still developing, end quote. So finally, who on the NCCA is responsible for choosing these books, which are clearly inappropriate for young people? Are the chief executive officer of the NCCA? Is it the chief executive officer of the NCCA, the education officer for English on the NCCA, and the principal officer for the curriculum and assessment unit, along with all the other past and present education officer members of the NCCA English course committees for junior and senior level? Are they going to be held accountable? The objectionable texts in question were introduced in 2014. This, to be noted, is before Minister Norma Foley came into office. So this happened in 2014.
Well, I mean, I believe they should be held accountable. The actual committee of people who reviewed these books and chose to put them on our children's curriculum. And those in charge who encouraged and allowed this to happen, obviously at the start of 2014, and when it was first introduced, whoever that was, they need to be held accountable.
So yeah, Wendy, in your report there, you contained some proposed recommendations. So one, that a thorough overhaul of the current lists take place and not be delayed until 2023. So this happens now. That the offensive and inappropriate books and movies be immediately removed from the prescribed text lists. That the lists which have not elicited any parental complaints or concerns be retained. See the pages 17 and 18 of this report, and suitable new ones be added to replace the others. Just recently, irishparents.blogspot.com posted a list of suitable modern alternatives on their blog site. So they're up there on the blog site now for parents to see and suggest. And if you have any other suggestions, you can add to that too. The NCCA have a section on their website where parents can click to suggest a novel, drama, text, or film. Instructions on how to do this are given on irishparents.blogspot.com. That's irishparents.blogspot.com in the introduction section. 4, the members of the NCCA committee responsible for choosing the selection of prescribed texts from 2014 to date be held responsible and possibly removed from their position. 5, that parents and English teachers who are parents themselves choose the text for any future prescribed lists in consultation with each other. The NCCA committee 2018 to date, brackets, have shown themselves inadequate for this task and incognizant of what is appropriate for the nation's teens to be reading. Your survey also then shows that parents clearly don't trust the NCCA anymore and are now calling for new consultation committee to be established, made up of parents and English teachers who are also parents, presumably of teenagers, who will choose all future books and films to be studied in our classrooms. So.
Yeah, I just want to interject there, but I think we need to make the point as well that, the survey showed that parents are asking that anybody going into the future choosing the books are also parents themselves. But, we can't state categorically that every NCCA committee member who has chosen these inappropriate books, that none of them are parents. We don't know that for certain, so
we don't know, yeah.
It's quite possible that some parents also make bad choices, but the point is that parents want to be involved from now on. They want parents choosing what.
And also, I would suggest not just parents of just teenagers, but even, 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds who are going to be teenagers in a blink of an eye. We know how quick that all happens. So, Jackie, what action can parents now take to ensure that these changes will take place?
Yeah, they can certainly contact the Minister for Education, Norma Foley. Her contact details are actually on the blog site. Contact your local TDs and councillors, your local school principal. Really, they're the ones that can make a change on the ground. And really, the impression we got from doing the reviews, and that was that a lot of the principals and teachers don't really know the content of the books. So the louder parents protest and the more awareness, then the more we'll be listened to. It's up to us to protect our children. Nobody else is going to do that for us. So if we take the time to go to the NCCA website, which is ncca.ie, give suggestions, because it's one thing to present a problem, but actually if we can give suggestions, a good alternative. So we're not just complaining, but we're actually giving the solution. Give suggestions for good alternative books, plays and films. And you can see on the irishparents.blogspot.com the kind of ideas that other parents have come up with if you can't think of them yourself. But the more proactive we are and not just complaining, but giving solutions and alternatives, I think that would be a good thing.
Absolutely. And another good idea would be as well to even as you watch this, maybe you can post this on and pass this on to other people, particularly as you said there, principals of schools and teachers as well. From the ground up, this needs to happen. Wendy, thank you so much for doing this. It's certainly been enlightening for me reading this and shocking, and I'm sure shocking for many of you listening or watching this. It shocks us to the core, what is going on. And if we don't do anything about it, it's going to continue. And Jackie, thank you again, and thank you all to the Irish Parents .blogspot and Irish Parents Review the English Curriculum. Thank you for you guys for taking the time out and doing it. And so it goes to you guys now out there. Take the time and get active about this as well. In the words of Edmund Burke, the 16th century Irish statesman, quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing," end quote. And he also said, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little," end quote. So parents, ring your principal, contact Norma Foley, contact your local counsellor, go on the NCCA website and suggest more suitable books and state your concerns. So that's it. Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you very much, Jackie. Again.
Thanks for having us.
All right. God bless you all. Take care.